In the merciless winter of 1875, a young widow carrying triplets finds herself cast out from her settlement, abandoned to the howling winds and bitter cold. As night falls and hope fades, she huddles beneath a thin blanket, her thoughts only of the innocent lives she carries within. But fate has other plans. Through the swirling snow emerges a lone figure, a man with a price on his head and a past stained with regret. In a moment that will change both their lives forever, this outlawed cowboy makes a choice that defies his survival instincts. He stops to help. What mysterious demons drive this dangerous man to risk everything for a woman society has deemed worthless? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell twisted the gold band on her finger, its familiar weight now a reminder of all she had lost. Just 6 months ago, she had been Thomas Mitchell's cherished wife, respected throughout Willow Creek Settlement for her skilled midwifery and gentle spirit. The simple cabin they'd built together had been filled with dreams of the family they would raise, the future they would forge in this untamed territory. Thomas had been different from the other settlers. While most men saw the frontier as something to conquer, he approached it with reverence, learning from the land rather than fighting it. "Nature provides," he would say, teaching Sarah which herbs could heal and which berries would sustain them through winter. His hands, rough from working their small plot of land, were always gentle when tending to their garden or caressing her cheek. The fever took him in 3 days. Sarah pressed her palm against the slight swell of her belly, remembering the morning she'd discovered her pregnancy, the very day they'd laid Thomas in the frozen ground. The doctor's words still echoed in her mind. "3 heartbeats, Mrs. Mitchell. The Lord has blessed you with 3. But in the settlement's eyes, 3 mouths. To feed without a father's provision wasn't a blessing, it was a burden." She'd noticed the changes gradually. The way conversations would halt when she approached, how the other women's smiles grew tight and formal. The settlement council's meetings became more frequent, voices rising behind closed doors as they discussed the coming winter and dwindling supplies. "We barely have enough to feed those who can contribute," she'd overheard Elder Thompson say one evening. "A widow with 3 babes will drain our resources dry before spring." Sarah had tried to prove her worth, working twice as hard. Despite her growing belly, she took on extra midwife duties, preserved what food she could, even offered to teach the children reading and writing. But each passing day brought colder shoulders and darker whispers. The council's final judgment came with the first snow. Elder Thompson's quill scratched against the settlement ledger, each stroke like a nail in Sarah's coffin. She stood before the council, back straight despite her trembling hands, as 5 men decided her fate. The cabin's single candle cast long shadows across weather-worn faces that refused to meet her eyes. "The motion stands," Thompson announced, his voice carrying the weight of false mercy. "Mrs. Mitchell will be given until sunrise to gather her belongings. The settlement cannot," he paused, consulting his notes, "cannot sustain those who present an untenable burden on our limited resources." Sarah's voice emerged stronger than she felt. "My husband helped build these walls. His sweat is in this soil, his blood in these fields. He would never have turned away a soul in need." "Your husband is dead, Mrs. Mitchell," Councilman Peters cut in, his tone sharp as the winter wind. "And the living must think of the living. 3 children with no father, no means of support. It's a death sentence for all of us. I can work. I've been midwife to half the women here. You can barely stand now," Elder Thompson interrupted. "What happens when you're further along? When the babies come? Who will feed them, care for them? The settlement's resources belong to those who can contribute." Sarah touched her belly, feeling the flutter of movement within. "These are Thomas's children, your friend's children." Thomas would understand. He was a practical man. The words struck like a physical blow. Sarah knew Thomas would have done anything to protect his family, would have worked himself to death before letting them suffer, but she couldn't say that now. These men had already made their decision. They were just going through the motions of justice. Back in her cabin, Sarah moved with mechanical precision, packing what little she could carry. The woolen blanket Thomas had traded for last spring, a small pouch of dried herbs, the last of her bread. Her fingers brushed against Thomas's journal, tucked away in a drawer, and she added it to her bundle, unable to leave this piece of him behind. As night fell, Martha Peters, the councilman's wife, slipped through her door. Without a word, she pressed a package into Sarah's hands, extra bandages, a flask of witch hazel, clean cloths, the things a woman might need. Their eyes met in silent understanding before Martha hurried away, her kindness a secret in the growing dark. Sarah didn't sleep. She sat in Thomas's chair, watching the flames dance in their small hearth, memorizing the feel of warmth, of shelter. When the first grey light of dawn crept through her window, she gathered her meagre belongings and stepped out into the bitter morning. The settlement was silent, save for the crunch of snow beneath her feet. No one came to bid her farewell, though. She felt eyes watching from behind curtained windows. At the gate, Elder Thompson waited with the ledger. "Sign here," he said, offering the quill, "acknowledging that you leave of your own accord, absolving the settlement of any responsibility." Sarah's hand shook as she signed, the ink bleeding into the rough paper like tears. She thought of Thomas, of his belief in the goodness of people, and wondered what he would say now. "May God have mercy on your souls," she whispered, turning away from the only home she'd known in these territories. The gate closed behind her with a final hollow thud. The wind howled like a wounded animal, whipping Sarah's skirts around her legs as she pushed forward through knee-deep snow. Each step drained more of her strength, but stopping meant death. She'd been walking for hours, though the grey sky made it impossible to tell how many. Her world had shrunk to the space between each laboured breath, each careful step. "Just a little further," she whispered to the lives stirring within her. "Mama just needs to find shelter." But shelter from what? The storm? The cold? Or the knowledge that people she'd once called friends had sentenced her and her unborn children to die? Miles away, Jackson Cole pulled his coat tighter and squinted through the swirling snow. His horse, a sturdy paint-named Ghost, snorted in protest as another gust cut through them. The broken compass in his saddlebag mocked him. Not that it would have helped in this whiteout. He'd been aiming for the Missouri Territory, planning to lose himself in its vast expanse. But the storm had other ideas. 20 years of riding had taught him every trick for reading weather and terrain. But even he knew when nature had the upper hand. He needed to find shelter soon, or he'd be nothing but a frozen corpse for the spring thaw to reveal. The irony didn't escape him, surviving 3 prison breaks and countless gunfights, only to be done in by a winter storm. The wind shifted, and through the momentary break in the snow, he spotted something dark against the white. At first, he thought it was a tree, but trees didn't move like that, didn't stumble and catch themselves. His gut tightened. Out here, strangers meant trouble, and trouble was something he couldn't afford. Not with 2 territories worth of lawmen hunting him. But then the figure fell. Jackson's hand moved to his gun belt, touching the worn leather that had been his constant companion since he was 16. The smart play was to ride on. Whatever poor soul had wandered out in this storm wasn't his concern. He'd learned the hard way that helping others only brought pain. The figure struggled to rise, then collapsed again. "Damn it all," he muttered, turning Ghost toward the fallen stranger. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "The measure of a man isn't in how he treats his friends, but in what he does for strangers." Fat lot of good that philosophy had done his father, who died penniless and alone. As he drew closer, the figure resolved into a woman, her clothes crusted with snow, a bundle clutched to her chest. She looked up at his approach, and Jackson felt something shift in his chest. Her face was young, but her eyes held the kind of pain he recognized from his own reflection. The look of someone who'd been betrayed by those they trusted. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the wind. "My babies." Jackson saw her hands protectively cradling her swollen belly, and understanding hit him like a physical blow. She was with child, far along, by the look of it. What kind of monster would turn out a pregnant woman in weather like this? The same kind of people who'd label a man beyond redemption for a single mistake made in angry youth, his mind answered. He had a choice to make. The smart choice was clear. Ride on, save himself, let nature take its course. But as he sat there astride Ghost, watching this woman fight to protect the lives within her, he knew he'd already made his decision. Maybe he was his father's son. "After all, ma'am," he said, dismounting and approaching slowly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. "Let's get you somewhere warm." Ghost trudged through the deepening snow, carrying both riders with steady determination. Jackson felt the woman's arms wrapped weakly around his waist, her pregnant belly pressed against his back. Every few minutes, he'd reach down to touch her hands, making sure they were still gripping his coat. Each time he found them a little colder. "Stay with me, Mom," he called over his shoulder. "Got to be something out here. Trappers don't leave good territory empty." He wasn't sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. "Sarah," she mumbled against his back. "My name is Sarah." "Jackson," he replied, though he hadn't planned to give her his real name. "Hold on tight, Sarah." Through the curtain of snow, a dark shape gradually emerged, square and solid against the organic shapes of winter bare trees. Jackson felt Sarah stir behind him. "Looks like an old line cabin," he said, guiding Ghost closer. "Trappers use them during season." He studied the building carefully as they approached. No smoke from the chimney, no tracks in the snow. Abandoned, then. Good. The cabin was small but solidly built, its log walls offering blessed shelter from the wind. Jackson helped Sarah dismount, supporting her weight as her legs threatened to give way. He found the key hanging from a nail beside the door, right where experience told him it would be. Trapper's code, leaving shelter accessible to any poor soul desperate enough to need it. Inside, the cabin was cold but dry. A pot-bellied stove squatted in one corner, and rough-hewn furniture lined the walls. A narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, shelves holding dusty preserves and basic supplies. "Let's get you warm," Jackson said, helping Sarah to the bed. She sank onto it gratefully, still clutching her small bundle of belongings. He busied himself with the stove, trying to give her space while keeping her in his peripheral vision. Trust went both ways out here. The stove came to life quickly, another bit of trapper's wisdom, leaving dry kindling and wood ready for the next visitor. As warmth slowly filled the cabin, Jackson tended to Ghost, bringing his tack inside to dry and ensuring the horse was sheltered in the cabin's small lean-to. When he returned, Sarah had managed to remove her snow-crusted outer layers, but was shivering violently. Without a word, he shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling it close. I was certain." "Don't thank me yet," he said gruffly, checking the preserves on the shelves. "Storm's got us trapped for now. Might not be such good company." Sarah watched him move around the cabin, her eyes following his every movement. He knew that look, sizing him up, wondering if her rescuer might prove more dangerous than the cold. "I won't hurt you," he said finally, setting a jar of preserved peaches on the table. "Can't promise much else, but I give you my word on that. Your word mean much." Her voice was stronger now, with an edge of steel that surprised him. Jackson paused in his work, meeting her eyes. "Used to be all a man had out here was his word. Some of us still believe that." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she nodded slowly. "Then I give you my word as well. Your kindness won't bring you trouble from me." He almost laughed at that. Trouble had been his constant companion long before meeting her. Instead, he pulled out a cooking pot and set about making a simple meal. From the cabin's stores, as the peaches heated with a handful of dried beef, filling the cabin with an incongruously homey smell, Sarah spoke again. They cast me out. My settlement said 3 babies with no father would drain their winter stores. Jackson stirred the pot, letting the silence stretch. Sometimes silence was the kindest response to pain. 3? He finally asked. Triplets. Her hand moved to her belly. Due before spring. Jackson nodded, adding another log to the stove. Get some rest. Storm's got a day or 2 left in it. We'll figure out the rest after. Sarah eased herself down onto the bed, still wrapped in his coat. Why did you stop? She asked softly. You could have ridden past. Jackson stared into the stove's flames, remembering another winter, another choice. Maybe I'm tired of riding past, he said finally. Dawn broke on their second day in the cabin, the storm still raging outside. Sarah woke to find Jackson adding wood to the stove, his movements precise and quiet. She'd noticed how he did everything, with that same careful attention. A man accustomed to watching his back. While checking his saddlebags for coffee, Jackson froze. A piece of paper had fallen from the bag, skittering across the rough wooden floor. Sarah reached for it before he could move, her fingers closing around the weathered edges of a wanted poster. Their eyes met across the cabin's small space. Jackson's hand hadn't moved to his gun, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his breath had gone shallow. $500 reward, she read aloud, her voice steady despite her racing heart. For the capture of Jackson Cole, wanted for the murder of James Harrison, Carson City, 1870. She looked up at him. Is this you? Jackson's jaw worked silently for a moment before he spoke. Yes. Sarah studied the poster again, comparing the younger face sketched there with the man before her. Did you do it? Kill this James Harrison? Yes. His voice was rough, like he had to drag the word from somewhere deep inside. I was 22, hot-headed. He cheated my father at cards, took everything we had. Pa couldn't take the shame. Hung himself in our barn. Jackson's hands clenched into fists. I tracked Harrison down, called him out. Fair fight, but... He shrugged. Law didn't see it that way. Sarah folded the poster carefully, considering her next words. You've had 5 years to become someone different. That's a gentle way of looking at it. I'm alive because you stopped, she said simply. My babies are alive because you chose to help instead of riding past. Seems to me that says more about who you are than what you did 5 years ago. Jackson turned away, but not before she caught the flash of emotion across his face. Ain't that simple? No, Sarah agreed, remembering the faces of the settlement council, her neighbors turning away. Nothing ever is. But I've seen good men do terrible things out of fear, and terrible men do good things for show. You didn't stop for show. There was no one to see, no reward to gain. She rose carefully from the bed, one hand supporting her belly, and crossed to where he stood. Holding out the wanted poster, she met his eyes. What you do with this second chance matters more than what you did with your first. Jackson took the poster, staring at it for a long moment before crumpling it and tossing it into the stove. They watched together as the paper caught, curled, and turned to ash. I got word last month, he said finally. Harrison's brothers hired guns to track me down. Professional men, not bounty hunters. That's why I was heading to Missouri Territory. Thought I might lose them in the mountains. And now, Sarah asked softly, now I've got a pregnant woman and 3 unborn babies to think about. He turned to face her fully. I won't bring trouble to your door, Sarah. Once the storm breaks, you'll what? Leave me alone out here? Go back to running. She stepped closer, forcing him to look at her. We've both been cast out, Jackson. Both been judged and found wanting by people who thought they had the right. Maybe we were meant to find each other. The silence stretched between them, filled with the crackle of the stove and the howl of the wind. Finally, Jackson spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm not a good man, Sarah. Good men don't always make the right choices, she replied. And bad men don't usually torture themselves over past mistakes. She touched his arm gently. I trust you, Jackson Cole, not despite your past, but because of how you carry it. He covered her hand with his own, rough and calloused. Then God, help us both, he said softly, because I aim to deserve that trust. The storm finally broke after 4 days, leaving behind a world transformed by snow and silence. But as the sky cleared, Sarah's health deteriorated. Jackson woke to her labored breathing and found her burning with fever, her skin hot to the touch despite the cabin's chill. Just tired, she insisted weakly, but Jackson saw the fear in her eyes. They both knew what fever could mean out here, especially for a woman carrying 3 lives within her. You're a midwife, he said, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. Tell me what to look for, what to do. Sarah's instructions came between shallow breaths. Need willow bark for the fever, yarrow if you can find it, and she clutched his hand suddenly, her grip surprisingly strong. If you find people, don't tell them about the babies. They'll turn us away, like the others. Jackson squeezed her hand gently. Rest. I'll find what you need. He prepared for the journey methodically, laying everything within Sarah's reach. Water, preserved food, extra blankets. His father's voice echoed in his memory, teaching him wilderness survival. Nature provides. He remembered Sarah saying Thomas had told her. Well, he'd find what nature provided or die trying. I'll be back before dark, he promised. You hold on, Sarah. You and those babies just hold on. The snow was deep but pristine, making Ghost's progress slow but steady. Jackson rode with purpose, scanning the white landscape for any sign of the plants Sarah had described. But after 2 hours of searching, he knew he needed help, the kind that came with generations of knowledge about these lands. His instincts led him to follow a nearly invisible trail of broken branches and disturbed snow. Native Americans often wintered in the sheltered valleys, and right now they were Sarah's best hope. It was a risk. They might kill him on sight, or worse, turn him in for the reward. But he'd made his choice back in that storm, when he first saw Sarah fall. The settlement appeared suddenly, a cluster of hide-covered lodges nestled in a protected valley. Jackson approached slowly, hands raised, speaking the few words of Lakota he'd learned over years of frontier life. An arrow thudded into the snow beside Ghost. The message was clear. Close enough. I come seeking medicine, Jackson called out. A pregnant woman is sick. I'll trade anything. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then an elderly woman emerged from one of the lodges, her face deeply lined, but her eyes sharp. She spoke rapidly to the warriors flanking her, never taking her eyes off Jackson. A young brave who spoke broken English stepped forward. Grandmother, that's why you helped this woman. You are not her man. Jackson thought of Sarah's courage, her compassion, even after learning his darkest truth. Because she saw good in me when no one else did. Because she carries 3 innocent lives that deserve a chance. The grandmother spoke again, and the brave translated. 3 spirits in one belly. This is powerful medicine, special blessing. Or a curse, Jackson said quietly, remembering the settlement that had cast Sarah out. The old woman approached, studying him with ancient eyes. Whatever she saw made her nod decisively. She spoke at length, the brave translating. Grandmother says, you have death on your hands but life in your heart. She will help, but you must stay while she prepares the medicine. Learn how to use it. Jackson dismounted, relief making his knees weak. Thank you. Whatever price you name. The grandmother waved his words away, already turning toward her lodge. The brave smiled slightly. No price. She says 3 spirits choose their protectors. You were chosen. Now you must learn to protect. For the next few hours, Jackson watched intently as the grandmother prepared her medicines, memorizing each herb, each preparation. She worked with practiced efficiency, creating not only the remedies Sarah needed now, but additional medicines for the births to come. Through the Braves translation, she taught Jackson the signs of approaching labor, ways to ease the baby's passage, how to handle the complications that might arise with multiple births. As the sun began its descent, she pressed a carefully wrapped bundle into his hands. The Brave translated her final words, "Go, your woman's spirits are restless, but remember, you are welcome here. Some debts can only be paid forward." Jackson rode back through the gathering dusk, the precious medicine bundle secured inside. His coat. Above him, the first stars emerged in the crystal-clear sky, and for the first time in 5 years, he felt the weight of his past begin to lift. When he reached the cabin, he found Sarah awake, her hand pressed against her belly. "They've been kicking," she whispered. "All 3 of them, like they knew you'd come back." Jackson knelt beside her bed, carefully unpacking the grandmother's medicines. "Of course I came back," he said softly. "We're family now." A week after Sarah's fever broke, Jackson was chopping wood when he heard it, the distant but unmistakable sound of horses approaching. He dropped the axe and moved silently into the cabin where Sarah sat mending his spare shirt. "Riders," he said quietly, reaching for his gun belt. "At least 3, maybe 4. Sarah's hands stilled on the fabric. "Bounty hunters. Could be." He peered through a gap in the logs. "Or could be trappers coming to check their line." But trappers usually traveled alone or in pairs, and these riders moved with too much purpose. "You should go," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear he could see in her eyes. "Slip out the back while there's time." Jackson checked his ammunition with practiced efficiency. "Not leaving you." "Jackson." "No." He turned to face her fully. 5 years I've been running, 5 years of looking over my shoulder, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. I'm done running." Through the wall they heard the horses stop, followed by the crunch of boots in snow. Jackson positioned himself by the door, gun ready but not drawn. Sarah picked up her sewing again, the picture of domestic tranquility, though he saw how tightly she gripped the needle. A heavy knock rattled the door. "Hello, the cabin," a deep voice called. "Got a question for whoever's inside." Jackson caught Sarah's eye, nodded once, then called back, "Cabin's occupied. State your business. Name's Marshal Wade Burton out of Carson City. Looking for a man. Thought you might have seen him pass through." Jackson's jaw tightened. Burton. He knew that name, one of the few lawmen he actually respected from his time. In Nevada, the marshal had a reputation for being fair, but he was also relentless once he took on a case. "Just my wife and me in here," Jackson replied, the word wife falling naturally from his lips. "Storm kept us snowed in past week." A pause then. "Mind if we come in? Got a description we'd like to check against travelers you might have seen." Jackson holstered his gun. Burton would spot a drawn weapon immediately and opened the door. The marshal stood on the threshold, snow dusting his gray-streaked beard. Behind him, 3 deputies kept their hands near their weapons. Burton's eyes widened slightly as he took in Jackson's face, but he gave no other sign of recognition. His gaze shifted to Sarah, noting her condition, then back to Jackson. "Ma'am," he said politely, touching the brim of his hat. "Sorry to disturb you. We're tracking a fugitive. Murdered a man in Carson City few years back. Cole's his name. Jackson Cole. Heard tell he was headed this way." Sarah's voice was perfectly calm. "We've seen no one, Marshal. Storms kept everyone sensible indoors." Burton nodded slowly, his sharp eyes taking in every detail of the cabin. Jackson knew what he was seeing, the single bed, the domestic touches. Sarah had added, the careful organization that spoke of a couple planning to stay. "That's your horse in the lean-to?" Burton asked Jackson. "Fine paint." "Yes, sir. Had him 3 years now." 3 years. Burton's hand wasn't near his gun, but his posture had shifted subtly. "Interesting. Man, I'm looking for stole a paint horse when he broke jail 2 years back. The tension in the cabin could have been cut with a knife." Jackson felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine despite the cold. "Marshal," Sarah said suddenly, one hand pressing against her belly. "Oh." Her face contorted in pain. Everyone's attention snapped to her. Burton stepped forward instinctively, concern replacing suspicion. "Ma'am, you all right?" "The babies," she gasped. "They're not due yet. It's too early." Jackson moved to her side, genuine worry mixing with tactical awareness. Burton was backing toward the door, clearly unwilling to intrude on such a private moment. "You folks need help?" the marshal asked. But his tone had changed. "Town's 2 days' ride, but—" "Thank you, Marshal," Jackson said, supporting Sarah as she breathed heavily. "But my wife needs quiet now, and privacy." Burton nodded, already ushering his deputies out. "Of course, you take care of your family, son, and—" He paused in the doorway, meeting Jackson's eyes. "If you do see Cole, tell him Carson City's a long way from here. Might be some men would rather track real criminals than chase old ghosts." The door closed behind him. They waited, barely breathing, until the sound of horses faded into distance. Only then did Sarah relax, her labor pains vanishing. "That was quick thinking," Jackson said softly. "Learned a few things as a midwife." She touched his arm. "He knew who you are." "Yes, but he let you go." "Let us go." Jackson stared at the closed door, remembering Burton's final words. "Some men can see past what's written in ledgers and wanted posters. See what's real." Sarah leaned against him, both hands cradling her belly. "And what's real, Jackson Cole?" He covered her hands with his own, feeling the strong movements of the babies beneath. "This. Us. The family we're making." Outside, fresh snow began to fall, covering the tracks of the marshal's party, erasing all evidence of their visit. Inside, Jackson held Sarah close, knowing that for the first time in years, he was exactly where he needed to be. Evening settled over the cabin like a soft blanket, bringing with it the kind of quiet that made people speak their truths. Sarah sat in the cabin's only rocking chair, Jackson's handiwork from the past week, while he worked at the table, his hands moving steadily over a piece of wood. The familiar rhythm of knife against pine filled the comfortable silence between them. Sarah watched his hands, remembering how gently they had checked her fever, how carefully they now tended to her daily needs. These weren't the hands of the angry young man who had killed in vengeance 5 years ago. They were the hands of someone, learning to create rather than destroy. "What are you making?" she asked finally, though she had begun to guess. Jackson turned the piece so she could see. A small wooden horse, its lines simple but graceful. "Thought the little ones might like something to play with when they arrive." His voice was gruff with embarrassment. "My father taught me. Said every child should have something made with love." The word hung in the air between them, unspoken, but present in every shared glance, every careful touch, every quiet moment of the past weeks. "Thomas used to whittle," Sarah said softly, her hand moving to her belly as one of the babies kicked. "He made me a little bird when we first married. Said it was to remind me that love gives us wings." She smiled at the memory, surprised to find it brought warmth now instead of pain. Jackson set down his knife, studying her face in the lamplight. "You still love him." "I'll always love him," she answered honestly. "He gave me these precious lives I carry." But she met Jackson's eyes steadily. "A heart can expand to hold more love. It doesn't have to replace what was there before." Jackson stood slowly, moving to kneel beside her chair. With infinite care, he placed his hand beside hers on her belly. The babies, as if sensing his presence, kicked against his palm. "I never thought I'd have this," he said quietly. "After what I did, I figured my life would be nothing but running, no roots, no family, no love." He swallowed hard. "Then I found you in that storm, and everything changed." Sarah covered his hand with hers. "We found each other, Jackson. 2 broken people who somehow make something whole together." He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw the same wonder she felt. "Sarah, I know I'm not worthy." "Stop." She touched his cheek, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palm. "Worthiness isn't something other people can judge. It's something we prove through our choices, our actions, our love." Jackson turned his face into her touch, pressing a kiss to her palm that made her breath catch. "I choose you," he whispered. "You and these babies. I choose this life we're building. However long we get to have it. However long." Sarah's hand tightened on his. "No, I won't accept that. We're not just surviving anymore, Jackson. We're living, building, planning for a future." He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. "A future," he repeated, his voice rough with emotion. "I like the sound of that." When he kissed her, it was soft and sweet and full of promise. Sarah melted into him, feeling the solid strength of his chest against her, the careful way he held her to accommodate her growing belly. This wasn't the passionate rush of young love, but something deeper, a love born of shared struggles and chosen trust, of seeing each other's broken pieces and choosing to build something new together. This year, babies kicked again, making them both laugh softly as they separated. Jackson rested his forehead against hers, his hands spanning her belly protectively. "They approve," Sarah whispered, smiling. "Smart kids." He kissed her again briefly, taking after their mama already. Later, as they lay in their separate beds, Jackson, still insisting on taking the floor despite Sarah's protests, she heard him humming softly as he returned to his whittling. The tune was an old lullaby, one her own mother used to sing. Looking at his silhouette in the dying firelight, Sarah felt a peace she hadn't known since Thomas's death. Love, she realized, wasn't about replacing what was lost. It was about finding new ways to be whole. The sound of the settlement's church bell carried far in the crisp morning air, its familiar toll stopping Sarah in her tracks as she gathered kindling. 8 weeks had passed since her exile, and the sound brought a rush of memories. Sunday services, community gatherings, the way Thomas would hold her hand during prayers. Jackson appeared at her side, instantly alert. Riders coming, but they're making no effort to hide their approach. Through the trees, they could see 2 figures on horseback, following the old trapper's trail. Sarah recognized them immediately, Martha Peters and her teenage son, William. Her heart clenched. Martha, who had secretly given her medical supplies on that last night. "They're friends," she said quickly, catching Jackson's arm as he reached. "You for his gun." "Or they were once." Martha spotted them and raised her hand in greeting, her face drawn with worry. William led their horses forward carefully, his young face serious. "Sarah!" Martha called out, relief evident in her voice. "Thank God you're alive. We've been searching the line cabins for days." Jackson positioned himself slightly in front of Sarah, his posture protective, but not threatening. Martha's eyes widened as she took in his presence, noting how close he stood to Sarah, how her hand rested naturally on his arm. "This is Jackson," Sarah said simply. "My husband." Martha's expression shifted from surprise to understanding. "The settlement needs you, Sarah. There's fever in the children's dormitory, 6 cases already, and Dr. Williams is 3 days. Right away, treating the Miller homestead." Sarah felt the weight of those words. The children's dormitory housed the settlement's orphans, including 3 of Martha's nieces, taken in after their parents died on the trail west. "The council," Martha continued, her voice bitter, "they're saying it's God's punishment for their charity in housing orphans. They want to send the sick children away like they—" She stopped, glancing at Sarah's now prominent belly. "Like they sent me away," Sarah finished quietly. William spoke up, his young voice cracking with emotion. "Little Mary's real bad, Mrs. Mitchell. He stumbled over what to call her. "She keeps asking for you. Says you always made the medicine taste less awful." Sarah looked at Jackson, seeing her own conflict mirrored in his eyes. These were the people who had cast her out, left her to die. But among them were also children who had never harmed her, people like Martha who had shown kindness when they could. "It's your choice," Jackson said softly. "But whatever you decide, I'm with you." Sarah squared her shoulders. "The children need medicine from the grandmother's settlement," she said, "and I'll need help carrying my supplies." Martha's relief was palpable, but William looked uncertainly at Jackson. "The council, they've posted guards since the fever started. No strangers allowed in. Then they'll have to make an exception, Sarah said firmly. Jackson's my husband. Where I go, he goes. The ride to the Native American settlement was tense with urgency. The grandmother, seeing their need, quickly prepared the medicines while teaching Sarah new preparations for fever and chest congestion. When Sarah offered payment, the old woman simply pointed to her belly and smiled. As they approached Willow Creek settlement, Sarah felt Jackson's tension. Armed guards stood at the gates, and beyond them she could see Elder Thompson watching their approach. Hold fast to each other, Martha whispered as the gates opened. The council fears the fever more than they fear change. Elder Thompson's face was a mask of conflicting emotions as they rode in, relief at seeing Sarah, shock at her obvious pregnancy, suspicion of Jackson. But before he could speak, a woman's cry split the air. Sarah's here. Sarah's come back. Suddenly they were surrounded by familiar faces, women Sarah had helped through difficult births, men whose children she had tended through illness. And through it all, Jackson remained at her side, his presence both protection and support. Children first, Sarah said, her voice carrying with quiet authority. Questions and judgments can wait. As they walked toward the dormitory, she heard the whispers, saw the pointing fingers. But she also saw something else. Respect in the eyes of those who had once turned away. She wasn't the same woman they had cast out. She was stronger now, supported not by their approval, but by the love of the man beside her and the lives she carried within. The settlement's church bell tolled again, but this time Sarah didn't flinch. Its sound no longer carried the weight of judgment, only the marking of time. And time, she had learned, had a way of healing even the deepest wounds. Sarah felt the first pain while teaching Martha's youngest niece how to fold the fever compresses. 2 weeks of treating the sick children had earned them a tentative place in the settlement, though they still slept in a small cabin on the outskirts. The pain was different from the practice contractions she'd been experiencing. Sharper, more purposeful. She caught her breath, steadying herself against the dormitory wall. Too early, she thought. The babies weren't due for another 3 weeks. Sarah. Martha looked up from where she was tending to little Mary, now recovering. Her eyes widened as she took in Sarah's stance. Is it time? I'm not sure. Another pain gripped her, and this time there was no doubt. Yes, find Jackson. He's chopping wood behind the schoolhouse. Martha hurried out, but it was Elder Thompson who appeared in the doorway moments later, his face grave. Mrs. Cole, he said, using the name that still caused whispers in the settlement, the council has convened. We need to discuss where arrangements can be made for your delivery. Sarah straightened, one hand protectively over her belly. My husband and I have a cabin. The council feels, given the unique nature of your condition, that the settlement's medical room would be more appropriate. Under proper supervision, of course. The implication was clear. They wanted to control this birth, to have a say in what happened to these babies. Before Sarah could respond, Jackson's voice came from behind Thompson. My wife will birth our children where she feels safest. His tone was quiet, but carried an edge of steel. And I'll be with her. Thompson turned, his expression a mix of distaste and resignation. Mr. Cole, surely you understand that childbirth is women's work, and given your background. Given my background, Jackson cut in, moving to Sarah's side, you should understand that I won't let anyone separate me from my family again. The tension was broken by Sarah's sharp intake of breath as another contraction hit. Jackson supported her immediately, his hands steady and sure. Martha, Sarah managed between breaths. You sent William for the grandmother? Martha nodded, stepping forward. He rode out as soon as you showed signs. She'll come, the Indian woman. Thompson's face darkened. Now see here, Elder Thompson, Martha interrupted, her voice surprisingly firm. These babies are coming whether you approve of the circumstances or not. Sarah is the best midwife we've had in 10 years, and she's chosen her birth attendants, unless you'd care to assist personally. The older man stepped back, clearly flustered. The council will need to discuss. The council can discuss while I labor, Sarah said, breathing through another contraction. But these babies will come with their father present and the grandmother's wisdom to guide us. Those are my terms. Jackson lifted her easily in his arms. Discussion's over. My wife needs to rest. They made their way to their cabin, followed by Martha and, to everyone's surprise, Rachel Thompson, the elder's wife and the settlement's most experienced midwife. At the cabin door, Rachel met Sarah's questioning look with a small smile. Some things, she said quietly, are more important than council decisions. Inside, Jackson and Martha transformed the small space efficiently, following Sarah's breathless instructions. Fresh straw beneath clean sheets, water heating on the stove, the grandmother's medical supplies laid out carefully. 3 babies, Rachel mused, helping Sarah change into a clean nightgown. In all my years, I've never seen it. They'll need special care, all of them. They'll have it, Jackson said firmly, positioning himself behind Sarah to support her through another contraction. They'll have everything they need. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the window as Sarah's labor intensified. The grandmother arrived just as the light was fading, bringing with her an air of calm capability that seemed to fill the cabin. She took one look at Sarah and nodded approvingly. "Strong mother," she said through Martha's translation. "Strong babies. All is as it should be." Sarah gripped Jackson's hands as another contraction peaked. Through the pain, she felt the rightness of this moment, her husband's strength behind her, the wisdom of women surrounding her, and the love that had brought them all to this place. "Tell me about the blankets again," she whispered to Jackson. During a brief respite, he pressed a kiss to her temple, his voice low and soothing. 3 blankets, 1 for each little one, blue like the mountain lupine, yellow like summer sunflowers, white like fresh snow, made with love, just waiting to wrap them up warm and safe. Another contraction gripped her, stronger than before. The grandmother nodded, speaking rapidly to Martha. "The first one comes," Martha translated. "Sarah, you know what to do." Sarah squeezed Jackson's hands, drawing strength from his presence. "We're ready," she said. "We're all ready now." The first baby arrived as midnight approached, announcing herself with a fierce cry that seemed to shake the cabin's very walls. The grandmother caught her expertly, checking her quickly before placing her on Sarah's chest. "A girl," Martha translated, tears in her eyes. Strong and perfect. Jackson's arms tightened around Sarah as they both stared in wonder at their daughter's tiny face. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her fists clenched in protest at the cold world, but she quieted as soon as she felt her mother's warmth. "Hope," Sarah whispered, touching one perfect cheek. "Her name is Hope." She looked up at Jackson. "Because you gave me hope when I had none." Rachel Thompson efficiently swaddled the baby in the blue blanket while Sarah's labor continued. The grandmother's calm voice guided them through each moment, her ancient knowledge blending with Rachel's experienced hands and Martha's steady support. The second baby took longer, his journey more difficult. Sarah's strength began to flag, her breath coming in desperate gasps. "Can't," she mumbled, her head falling back against Jackson's chest. "Too tired." "You can," Jackson said fiercely. "You're the strongest person I know, Sarah Cole. These are our children, and they need their mama's strength." The grandmother pressed a cup of medicine to Sarah's lips, then spoke urgently to Martha. "She says to tell the babies a story," Martha translated. "Give them a path to follow with your words." Jackson didn't hesitate. "I remember the first moment I saw your mama," he began, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "She was standing against a storm that should have broken her, but she wouldn't give up. She taught me that real strength isn't in fighting the world, it's in having the courage to love it anyway. That's the legacy you're being born into, not my past, mistakes or the judgment of others, but your mama's boundless heart." Sarah bore down with renewed purpose, drawing strength from his words and the supportive hands around her. Finally, their son emerged with a quieter cry than his sister's, but no less healthy. "A boy," Rachel announced, wrapping him in the yellow blanket. Look at those lungs. Faith, Sarah said, touching his dark hair, because you had faith in me, in us, when everyone else turned away. The grandmother's expression grew serious as she felt Sarah's belly. She spoke rapidly to Martha. The third baby is turned, Martha translated. She says we must act quickly. What followed was a carefully orchestrated dance between the grandmother and Rachel, their years of combined experience working in seamless coordination. They moved Sarah gently but firmly into different positions, the grandmother's weathered hands manipulating the baby through her belly, while Rachel supported and guided. Jackson never let go of Sarah's hands, even when she gripped them hard enough to leave marks. He kept talking, his voice a lifeline she could follow, about the cabin they would build, the garden they would plant, the life they would share. Dawn was breaking when their third child finally arrived, small but fighting. For one terrifying moment there was silence. Then the grandmother did something, a gentle tap, a skilled touch, and the tiniest cry they'd ever heard filled the cabin. Rachel quickly wrapped the baby in the white blanket, placing her with her siblings at Sarah's breast. "Another girl," she said softly. "She's small, but she's got spirit." "Grace," Sarah and Jackson said together, then smiled at each other through their tears. "Hope, faith, and grace," Martha mused, wiping her eyes. "Perfect names for new beginnings." The grandmother spoke again, her words carrying the weight of prophecy. She says 3 babies born between midnight and dawn are marked by destiny, Martha translated. A hope born in darkness, faith with the rising moon, and grace with the sun. They will bridge worlds, these 3. Sarah looked down at her children, Hope's strong cry already softening to sleep, Faith's eyes blinking curiously at the world, tiny Grace determinedly rooting for milk. Then she looked up at Jackson, seeing in his face the same awe she felt. He touched each small head gently, reverently. "They're miracles," he whispered. "All 3 of them." "No," the grandmother said, in careful English surprising them all. "Not miracles. Love made flesh, most powerful medicine." Outside, the settlement was waking. Soon there would be visitors, questions, decisions to be made. But in this moment, in the quiet dawn, a family that had been forged in desperation was sealed in joy. Sarah touched the silver star necklace Jackson had given her weeks ago. 3 small stars for 3 small lives. "We did it," she said softly. "Together, together." Jackson agreed, gathering his family close. Always together. Spring came to the settlement like a slow awakening, snow melting to reveal tender green shoots beneath. The triplets were 6 weeks old when Jackson first noticed the purple crocus pushing through the earth beside their cabin's steps. He pointed it out to Hope, who he carried in a sling across his chest while he worked. She was the most demanding of the 3, always wanting to see everything happening around her. "That's your first flower, little one," he murmured. "First of many you'll see in your lifetime." Inside the cabin, Sarah was nursing Faith and Grace while talking with Martha about plans for a larger home. The smaller twins were more content than their sister, happy to drowse in their mother's arms while life moved around them. "The Anderson place," Martha was saying, spreading a rough map on the table. "It's been empty since they moved to California last fall. Good land, close enough to the settlement for trading but far enough for privacy. And—" she hesitated, glancing at Sarah. "The council's willing to sell it to you below market price." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "The council's feeling generous." "The council's feeling grateful," Martha corrected. 3 healthy births in the past month, all under your care. And the fever in the dormitory, not a single child lost. They're starting to remember why we needed you in the first place." Jackson came in with Hope, who was starting to fuss for her own feeding. The practiced dance of switching babies had become smooth over the weeks, each parent knowing exactly how to support the other. "Speaking of the council," Martha continued, watching them with a smile, "Elder Thompson's wife says he's been corresponding with the territorial governor about your situation, Jackson. Jackson stilled, his hand automatically moving to protect Hope. Has he now? Rachel says he's arguing for clemency, pointing out your service to the settlement, your family obligations. The governor's interested in cases of rehabilitation, apparently, especially with the territory pushing for statehood. Sarah reached for Jackson's hand. That would mean no more running, no more looking over our shoulders. A pardon isn't guaranteed, he said quietly, but she could see the hope in his eyes. No, Martha agreed, but it's a start. And in the meantime, there's the Anderson place to think about. 20 acres, good water rights, and the house is solid. Needs some work, but it could be a home, Sarah finished. She looked at Jackson. A real home for all of us. He squeezed her hand, then turned to Martha. The council's price? Martha named a figure that made both of them blink in surprise. Like I said, they're feeling grateful. And, she smiled. Rachel Thompson can be very persuasive when she wants to be. That evening, after Martha left and the babies were sleeping in their carefully crafted cradles, Sarah and Jackson walked the short distance to the Anderson place. The early spring sunset painted the sky in shades of promise, while the last patches of snow glimmered like scattered diamonds. The house was weathered but well built, with a broad porch and windows that would catch both morning and evening light. The barn needed new roofing, and the fence had seen better days, but Jackson's experienced eye could see the potential in every board and beam. Here, he said, leading Sarah to a spot behind the house, we could plant an herb garden for your medicines. And there, he pointed to a sunny slope, a vegetable patch, fruit trees along the south fence. Sarah leaned against him, breathing in the fresh earth smell of spring. The grandmother says she'll teach me more about healing plants. Says the babies should grow up knowing both worlds' medicine. Smart woman. Jackson wrapped his arms around her. Our children will know the best of everything. Your healing, her wisdom, the settlement's community. No more isolation, no more of fear. And you? Sarah turned in his arms. What will our children know of their father? Jackson was quiet for a moment, looking out over what could be their land. They'll know that every man has choice in him, that mistakes don't have to define. A life, that love. He touched her face gently. Love can change everything. A meadowlark called from a nearby fence post, its evening song carrying across the quiet land. From the settlement came the distant sound of the church bell, no longer a reminder of judgment, but simply a marker of time passing, of life moving forward. Should we make an offer? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Jackson smiled, pulling a carefully folded deed from his coat pocket. Already did. Martha brought it with her today. Just needs our signatures. Sarah took the paper, running her fingers over the words that would make this dream real. Then let's go home, she said. To our cabin, to our babies. And tomorrow we'll start building our future. Tomorrow, Jackson agreed, kissing her softly. And all the tomorrows after. The first warning came from William Peters, riding hard through the morning mist. Jackson was on the Anderson place's roof, replacing shingles, when the boy's horse thundered into the yard. Riders coming, William called up. 4 men, heavily armed, asked at Jensen's trading post about a man matching your description. Jackson was down the ladder in seconds, his mind already racing. The babies were with Sarah at the settlement clinic. She'd resumed her midwife duties part-time, taking the triplets with her. Safe then. But for how long? How far? He asked, reaching for the gun belt he'd kept close but unused these past months. 2 hours, maybe less. They're being real particular in their questions. These aren't regular bounty hunters, Mr. Cole. They're Harrison's men. Jackson's blood ran cold. Harrison's brother had finally found him. These wouldn't be men looking for a quick reward. They'd be professional killers with a personal vendetta to settle. Get to the settlement, he ordered William. Tell Sarah. He stopped, knowing his wife's determination. Tell her to stay with the babies, please. But as William rode off, Jackson saw another horse approaching, Elder Thompson, riding with surprising speed for a man his age. Cole! The elder called out, dismounting stiffly. Martha sent word. We don't have much time. Sir, you should... Don't. Sir, me boy. I've got 6 grandchildren sleeping safe because your wife saved them from fever, and I've watched you these past months, working honest days, loving those babies, building a real life." Thompson straightened his shoulders. "The settlement looks after its own." Before Jackson could respond, more horses appeared on the road. His heart sank, expecting the bounty hunters, but instead he saw familiar faces: Ben Jensen from the trading post, young Robert Matthews and his brothers, even William Peters returning with his father. "Got a plan," Mr. Peters said, dismounting. "If you're willing to trust us." Jackson looked at these men, some who had once judged him, others who had only recently come to know him, and felt something shift in his chest. This was what community meant. This was what he'd been running from all those years, thinking himself unworthy. "I'm listening," he said. The hunters arrived just past noon, their horses lathered from hard riding. 4 men, dressed too fine for regular bounty hunters, their guns too well maintained for simple lawmen. They found Jackson alone in front of the Anderson house, apparently mending a fence. "Cole," the leader called out, his voice carrying the cultured accent of the educated East. "My name is Edward Harrison. I believe you know why I'm here." Jackson straightened slowly, keeping his hands visible. "I know. My brother was a good man," Harrison said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "A proper gentleman who didn't deserve to die in some frontier saloon." "Your brother was a cheat who drove my father to suicide," Jackson replied calmly. "But that was a lifetime ago." Harrison's laugh was cold. "Justice doesn't have a time limit, Cole. Now, are you going to make this difficult?" "No," Jackson said, and whistled sharply. Suddenly, the apparently empty landscape came alive. From behind the barn, the house, the nearby trees, rifles appeared, all trained on Harrison's group. Elder Thompson stepped out from the barn, his own shotgun steady. "This man," Thompson called out, "is under the protection of Willow Creek Settlement. He has a wife, 3 newborn children, and a pardon petition before the territorial governor." "A petition means nothing," Harrison spat. "He's still a wanted man." "Is he?" Thompson produced an official-looking document. This arrived by morning stage, special delivery from the governor's office. Full pardon, citing exemplary service to the community and clear evidence of rehabilitation. Jackson's head snapped around. In shock, Thompson gave him the smallest of winks. "You're lying," Harrison snarled, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Test us," Peters said, stepping forward with his rifle. "See how many of your men survive to prove otherwise." The standoff stretched, marked only by the creak of leather and the soft spring wind. Finally, Harrison's shoulders slumped slightly. "My brother's blood still cries out for vengeance," he said, but the words sounded hollow. "Let it rest," Jackson said quietly. "Let him rest. God knows I've paid for my sins." Harrison studied him for a long moment, taking in the house behind him, the new roof, the careful repairs. "You've built something here?" he said finally. "A life," Jackson agreed. "A future. Something your brother might have had if he'd made different choices." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth. Then Harrison nodded once sharply and turned his horse. "My brother's dead," he said, not looking back. "Nothing will change that. But perhaps the living should concern themselves with living." They rode away as suddenly as they had come, leaving behind only hoofprints in the soft spring earth. Jackson felt his legs go weak, and Peters stepped forward to grip his shoulder. "That pardon," Jackson said to Thompson. "It's real," the elder smiled. "Arrived this morning. Rachel's been corresponding with the governor's wife. Seems she was quite moved by the story of a reformed man and his triplets." Jackson looked around at these men who had come to stand with him, to protect not just him, but what he represented, the possibility of redemption, of change, of building something new from the ashes of the past. "Thank you," he said simply. "All of you." "Welcome home, son," Thompson replied, and in those words, Jackson heard the final key turning in the lock of belonging. Sarah was waiting on the clinic's porch when Jackson returned, the triplets sleeping peacefully in their basket nearby. Her face showed the strain of hours spent wondering, worrying, but unable to leave their children unprotected. "You're safe," she whispered as he gathered her close. "When William told me about Harrison's men, I thought, I'm more than safe," Jackson said, pulling back to meet her eyes. "I'm free." He showed her the pardon, the official seal gleaming in the afternoon light. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the formal language that transformed their world. Full pardoning of all crimes and restoration of rights to Jackson Cole in recognition of exemplary reformation of character and service to community. "It's real?" Her voice caught. "Truly real?" "Witnessed and registered with the territorial court," Elder Thompson said, coming up the clinic steps. "No one can challenge it now." Sarah looked past them at the gathering crowd. It seemed the whole settlement had come to hear the news. Martha Peters pushed forward, baby Faith in her arms. She'd been watching the triplets while Sarah tended to her patients. "The council has called a meeting," Martha announced, but her smile suggested good news. "They want both of you there." The council chamber was crowded when they arrived, the afternoon sun streaming through its windows. All three babies were awake now, Hope studying the room with her usual intensity, Grace and Faith content in their parents' arms. Elder Thompson took his place at the head of the council table, but his formal demeanor was softened by Rachel's presence beside him. The other council members, men who had once voted to cast Sarah out, sat with their wives, an unusual departure from tradition. "Jackson and Sarah Cole," Thompson began, using their shared name officially for the first time. "This council once made a grievous error in judgment, allowing fear to overcome compassion, tradition to overshadow wisdom." He looked at Sarah. "We cast you out when you most needed shelter." "And I found shelter," Sarah said quietly, squeezing Jackson's hand. "Found love. Found strength I never knew I had." Rachel Thompson stepped forward. "Which is why we're here. Today, the council has voted unanimously on two matters." She nodded to her husband to continue. "First," Thompson said, "we wish to formally apologize for our actions against Sarah Mitchell Cole and to recognize her ongoing contribution to this settlement as our primary healer and midwife." Murmurs of approval filled the room. Sarah felt tears threatening but held them back, bouncing Grace gently in her arms. "Second," Thompson continued, "in light of Jackson Cole's full pardon and proven character, we wish to offer him a position on the settlement's council, specifically overseeing relations with native tribes and trade negotiations." Jackson's shock was visible. "Sir, you have connections with the native community that have benefited us all," Thompson interrupted. "The grandmother's medicines have saved lives. Your understanding of both worlds could help build bridges we desperately need. And," Rachel added with a smile, "we feel the council could benefit from a member who understands the true meaning of redemption." The room fell silent, waiting for Jackson's response. He looked down at Faith, sleeping trustingly in his arms, then at Sarah and their other daughters. "5 years ago," he said slowly, "I was a different man, angry, lost, believing justice meant revenge." He kissed Faith's forehead softly. "These little ones, my wife, this community, you've taught me that real justice is about making things right, building something better than what was broken." He straightened, meeting Thompson's eyes. "I accept, with gratitude and humility, and a promise to help others find the same redemption I've been granted." Sarah stepped forward then, her voice clear and strong. "When I was cast out, I thought I was being punished. Instead, I was being guided to exactly where I needed to be, to the family I was meant to have." She looked around the room, at faces that had once turned away, but now showed only welcome. "Sometimes the hardest paths lead us home." Thompson nodded, gravely. "Then let it be recorded. On this day, the Cole family takes their rightful place in Willow Creek Settlement, their past trials transformed into future wisdom." Rachel produced another document, a blank page in the settlement's record book. "Will you sign, all of you?" Jackson and Sarah stepped forward. With one hand, Jackson signed his name. No longer the signature of a wanted man, but of a council member, a husband, a father. Sarah signed next, adding a tender mark beside her name for each of their daughters. "Look, little ones," she whispered to the triplets. "This is the beginning of your story. Hope, Faith, and Grace Cole, born of love, hardship, and redemption. Born to build bridges between worlds." As if understanding the moment's importance, Hope let out one of her mighty cries, making everyone laugh. The sound of joy echoed through the council chamber, replacing old memories of judgment with new promises of acceptance and growth. Outside, the spring day was drawing to a close, painting the sky in colors of renewal. The settlement's church. Bell rang once, marking the hour, not an ending but a beginning. Summer bloomed across the Anderson place, now officially the Cole homestead, painting the land in vibrant colors. Jackson stood in the doorway of their newly expanded home, watching Sarah plant her herb garden while the triplets played on a quilt nearby. At 4 months old, they were developing distinct personalities that amazed him daily. Hope, true to her. Nature was already trying to crawl, frustrated by her body's limitations, but determined to explore. Faith watched everything with serious eyes, taking in the world before deciding whether to participate. And tiny Grace, still the smallest but growing stronger every day, had a smile that could light up the darkest room. The circuit preachers. "Coming next week," Sarah called out, patting soil around a yarrow plant. "Rachel says he's staying through Sunday." Jackson's heart quickened. They'd been waiting for this, a chance to make their marriage official in the eyes of both law and God. They'd been living as husband and wife, raising their children together, but something in both of them yearned for the formal blessing. "Guess. I'd better finish that wedding ring then," he said, touching the pocket where he kept the gold band he'd been carefully crafting. He'd traded 4 months of carpentry work for the raw gold, spending evenings shaping it into something worthy of Sarah's hand. The day of the wedding dawned clear and warm. The grandmother had arrived the previous evening, bringing gifts of blessed medicines and tiny moccasins for the babies. She sat now in the front row of the settlement's church, the triplets dressed in the ceremonial clothes she'd made them, watching with bright, knowing eyes as Jackson stood at the altar. Sarah appeared in the doorway on Elder Thompson's arm, a father's role he'd asked to fill, part of his ongoing atonement for past judgments. She wore a simple blue dress that Martha had helped her make, but to Jackson she had never looked more beautiful. "Dearly beloved," the circuit preacher began, his voice carrying through the packed church. It seemed the entire settlement had turned out, along with traders and trappers from the surrounding area. "We are gathered here today not just to join 2 people in matrimony, but to celebrate the extraordinary power of love to transform lives." Jackson took Sarah's hands in his, feeling the strength in them, hands that had delivered babies, mixed medicines, built a home, raised their children, hands that had pulled him from darkness into light. "Marriage," the preacher continued, "is more than a ceremony. It is a daily choice to love, to forgive, to build together something greater than either person could create alone. These 2 before us have already proven the depth of their commitment through trials that would break many couples. They have found in each other not just love, but redemption." Sarah squeezed his hands as they exchanged their vows, promises they had already been living but now spoke aloud before their community. When Jackson slipped the handcrafted ring onto her finger, fitting perfectly beside Thomas's band that she still wore, tears shone in both their eyes. "By the authority vested in me," the preacher proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The celebration that followed spilled out of the church and across the settlement's main square. Tables groaned with food brought by every family. Martha's famous berry pies, Rachel's herb, bread, dishes from the grandmother's people that brought new flavors to familiar palates. Children played while adults danced, the differences between settler and native, old-timer and newcomer, dissolving in the joy of the moment. Later, as evening painted the sky in wedding day gold, Jackson and Sarah slipped away to check on the sleeping triplets. Standing in the nursery of their new home, they held each other close. "Look what we built," Sarah whispered, gazing at their daughters. "Not just this house or our life together, but bridges between worlds, hope, faith, and grace. They'll grow up knowing all the best parts of every culture that made them." Jackson touched the new ring on her finger, then Thomas's band above it. "Two loves that made you stronger," he said softly. "Two worlds that made our family possible. And one future we'll build together," Sarah finished, drawing him down for a kiss. Through the open window came the sounds of continuing celebration, music and laughter, English and Lakota voices mingling in the summer evening. Their daughters slept peacefully, already at home in this world of mixed traditions and second chances. In the family Bible that Rachel had given them as a wedding gift, they would later record this day, not as the beginning of their marriage, for that had started in a storm-battered cabin months ago, but as the moment their private commitment became a public covenant, blessed by God and celebrated by the community that had become their own. 1 year to the day after the triplets' birth, Willow Creek Settlement gathered for a celebration unlike any in its history. The meeting house, once a place of stern judgments, overflowed with people from all walks of frontier life. Settlers sat beside native healers, traders mingled with trappers, and children of all backgrounds played together on the swept wooden floors. "Hard to believe," Martha whispered to Sarah, watching hope, faith, and grace toddle among the guests, accepting treats and attention from everyone they met. "1 year ago we were so closed off, so afraid of anything different. Now look at us," Sarah smiled, adjusting the medicine bag at her hip, a gift from the grandmother who had officially named her a keeper of both healing traditions. Sometimes it takes seeing the world through children's eyes to remember what matters. The triplets had indeed become a bridge between cultures. Hope, fearless as ever, had learned to speak her first words in both English and Lakota, charming. Everyone with her determined attempts at both languages. Faith, quiet but observant, could often be found sitting with the grandmother, seemingly absorbing ancient wisdom even before she could fully talk. Grace, though still the smallest, had her father's gift for bringing people together, her ready smile melting even the hardest hearts. Jackson stood at the front of the room, looking somewhat uncomfortable in his formal council clothes, but carrying himself with the dignity his position required. The trading post he'd helped establish between the settlement and native tribes had brought prosperity to both communities. More importantly, it had created understanding. "A year ago," he began, his voice carrying easily through the crowd, "I stood in this room as a pardoned man, uncertain of my place in this community. Today, I stand before you as a council member, a husband, a father, and most importantly, as living proof that second chances are sacred gifts." Sarah watched him with pride, remembering the haunted man she'd met in that snowstorm. Now he stood straight and sure, their daughters clustering around his legs as he spoke. "This past year has taught us all something about judgment," he continued. "We've learned that strength comes not from walls we build, but from bridges we create, that wisdom can wear many faces, that healing can come from unexpected sources." Elder Thompson rose slowly, leaning on his cane. He'd suffered a fall during the winter, and it was Sarah's combination of settler medicine and native herbs that had helped him recover. "When I cast Sarah out," the elder said, his voice thick with emotion, "I thought I was protecting our community. Instead, I nearly robbed us of our greatest blessings." He gestured to the gathered crowd. "Look at us now. Our trading is profitable, our children are healthy, and our hearts are wider than they've ever been." The grandmother spoke next. Her words translated by a young settler boy who had eagerly learned her language. 1 year ago, 3 spirits chose their time to enter this world. Between midnight and dawn, they came. Hope to light the darkness, faith to guide the way, and grace To heal old wounds, they have done as the spirits intended. Sarah felt tears in her eyes as she looked around the room. The children's dormitory, once a place of illness and fear, now had a thriving garden where native and settler children learned both peoples' planting ways. The trading post had become a place of cultural exchange as much as commerce, and her own clinic combined the best of both healing traditions, with apprentices from both communities learning side by side. Rachel Thompson stood, carrying a large book, the settlement's official record. We've gathered today not just to celebrate 3 precious lives, but to mark a transformation. From this day forward, Willow Creek Settlement will officially be known as Willow Creek Township, a place where all peoples are welcome to trade, learn, and live in peace. The cheer that went up shook dust from the rafters. Hope, startled by the noise, ran to Jackson's arms, while Faith gravely accepted a piece of ceremonial bread from the grandmother. Grace, in her typical fashion, worked her way through the crowd. Distributing smiles and tiny hugs, Sarah moved to stand beside her husband, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Did you ever imagine," she whispered, "that night in the storm, that we'd end up here?" Jackson pulled her close, watching their daughters weave through the celebration like living threads, binding the community together. "I imagined surviving," he said softly. "You taught me to live. They taught us all to thrive." Outside, the spring sun painted the land in shades of promise, while inside, 2 cultures celebrated as one family, brought together by 3 tiny bridges between worlds. 5. Springs had bloomed and faded since the night Sarah was cast into the storm. The photographer from the territorial capital adjusted his camera, trying to capture the entire gathering in front of the newly built Willow Creek Township Hall. At the center stood the Cole family, their story now legend throughout the territory. "Hope, sweetheart, please stand still," Sarah called to their eldest by minutes, who was far more interested in examining the camera's wooden legs than posing for posterity. At 5 years old, Hope was already known as the township's unofficial ambassador, floating easily between settler homes and native camps, collecting stories and friends with equal enthusiasm. Faith, serious in her dark braids, stood perfectly positioned, one hand holding her father's, the other grasping a small medicine bag, a gift from the grandmother, who had recognized in her the same healing gift her mother possessed. Grace, still smallest but quick as a spring wind, had somehow managed to gather a bouquet of wildflowers while no one was watching, tucking them into her sister's hair and her mother's apron. Jackson, now serving his 2nd term as Township Council President, kept one eye on his daughters while greeting visitors who had come from as far as St. Louis to study Willow Creek's unique approach to frontier life. The township had become a model of cooperation between cultures, its trading posts and healing center drawing people from across the territory. "Everyone ready?" the photographer called, ducking under his black cloth. "This photograph will be featured in the Territorial Gazette's special edition on successful frontier settlements." Sarah straightened her apron, now embroidered with both settler and native healing symbols. The clinic behind them had grown into a proper hospital, where she trained healers from both communities in the combined wisdom of 2 cultures. The grandmother, now moving slowly but still sharp of mind and spirit, sat in a place of honor beside them, her presence a reminder of how their journey had begun. "Wait!" called a familiar voice. Martha Peters hurried forward, carrying a package wrapped in soft leather. The council wanted this included in the photograph. She unrolled the bundle to reveal the settlement's original ledger, open to the page, that had recorded Sarah's exile. But now, surrounding that harsh entry were photographs, drawings, and careful notations documenting the township's transformation, including the official pardon that had allowed Jackson to build his new life. "A reminder," Martha said softly, "of how far we've come." The photographer positioned the ledger in front of them, its pages telling the story of fear transformed into acceptance, judgment into understanding. Hope immediately bent to examine it, her curiosity insatiable as always. "Mama," she said, pointing, "to the exile order, is this when you found Papa in the storm?" "That's when Papa found me," Sarah corrected gently, meeting Jackson's eyes over their daughter's head. "And we found our way home together." Faith spoke up then, her voice carrying her father's thoughtful tone. "The grandmother says we were born to build bridges, and so you have," the grandmother said in careful English, one of many things she'd learned in the past 5 years. Hope to light the way, faith to keep truth, grace to heal hearts. Grace, ever the peacemaker, had somehow managed to convince the photographer to accept a flower for his buttonhole. The man found himself smiling despite his professional demeanor. "I've photographed many frontier successes," he admitted, "but never one quite like this. Two cultures not just coexisting, but thriving together. Children growing up with the wisdom of both worlds. It's remarkable." "It's love," Jackson said simply, drawing Sarah close. "Love that saw past fear, past judgment, past differences. Love that built something new from something broken." The photographer raised his hand, ready to trigger the exposure. "Anyone have anything else to add before we capture this moment?" Sarah looked at their gathered family, not just her husband and daughters, but the grandmother who had saved her life, Martha, who had shown kindness in darkness, Rachel Thompson, who had helped forge their acceptance, and all the others who had become part of their expanding circle. "Just this," she said clearly, so it would be recorded with the photograph. "Every storm has its purpose, every exile can lead to home, and every ending," she smiled at her daughters, "these precious bridges between worlds, can become a new beginning." The camera's shutter clicked, capturing the moment for history, a family born of storm and sacrifice, a community transformed by love and understanding, and 3 little girls who had helped build bridges between worlds. Hope lighting the way forward, faith keeping the truth of both cultures, and grace healing the wounds of the past. In years to come, that photograph would hang in places of honor throughout the territory, its story told and retold. But the real legacy of the Cole family lived on in the daily life of Willow Creek Township, where children of all backgrounds played together in the streets, where wisdom was shared freely between cultures, and where every stranger was welcomed as family waiting to be found. For in the end, their story was more than one of redemption. It was proof that love, in all its forms, could transform not just hearts, but entire worlds.